Hello, friends. Welcome back to Chasing English, the place where learning English is fun and easy through amazing stories from history. Today, we start a new and very special series, The Life of George Washington, one of the most important people in the history of the United States. It was a cold and quiet morning on February 22, 1732, in the English colony of Virginia. In a small farm in Westmoreland County, a baby boy was born. His name was George Washington. Nobody knew that this little baby, from a simple farming family, would one day lead a great revolution and become the first president of the United States. George grew up in a big family. His father, Augustine Washington, was a hard-working man who owned farms and plantations. He was a respected businessman, but life in the 1700s was not easy. The family depended on farming, and every day was a struggle. His mother, Mary Ball Washington, was strong and strict. She believed in discipline and hard work. In those days, many children did not survive because of sickness and no medicine. George learned about strength and courage from a young age. But when George was only 11 years old, something very sad happened. His father died suddenly. Losing his father so young meant George had to grow up faster than other children. His mother raised him and his brothers and sisters alone, teaching them the importance of hard work, honesty, and responsibility. Because his father passed away, George did not inherit much land or money. Most of the family's property went to his older brothers. George had to find his own way to build his future. George did not go to a fancy school. He did not have a high education like rich children. Instead, he learned at home from tutors. He studied reading, writing, and math. One of the most important people in his life was his older half-brother, Lawrence Washington. Lawrence was like a father to George. He had served in the British Army and was educated and disciplined. George admired him a lot and learned leadership and responsibility from him. There is a famous story about young George and a cherry tree. When he was about 6 years old, he got a small axe as a gift. Excited to use it, George went into the garden and cut down a beautiful cherry tree. When his father asked who had done it, George bravely said, "I cannot tell a lie. I did it." His father was so impressed by his honesty that he forgave him immediately. Because George did not inherit much, he had to work hard. At 16 years old, he started working as a land surveyor, measuring and mapping land for people who wanted to buy or sell it. This job was not easy. He had to travel through dangerous forests, cross rivers, and sleep outside in bad weather. But these adventures made him strong and taught him survival skills that would help him in the future. By 17 years old, George was skilled and respected. He earned good money and people noticed his intelligence and discipline. He was no longer just a farm boy. He was becoming a responsible and ambitious young man. But then, in 1752, tragedy came again. Lawrence became very sick with tuberculosis, a deadly disease at that time. George cared for him and even traveled with him to warmer places, hoping the climate would help. Sadly, Lawrence died. George had now lost both his father and his beloved brother. Even though he was heartbroken, George became stronger. He took some of Lawrence's responsibilities and inherited Mount Vernon, a beautiful estate that would become his lifelong home. From this point, George was a young man with experience, discipline, and responsibility, and soon, people would see his natural leadership. By the time George Washington turned 21 years old, he had already faced loss, learned responsibility, and built a strong character. But a brand new challenge was waiting for him, one that would change his life. In the early 1750s, the British and the French were fighting over land in North America. Both wanted to control the Ohio River Valley, an important and valuable area. The British government needed someone brave and trustworthy to deliver a message to the French, asking them to leave the land. They chose George Washington for this dangerous mission. In 1753, George began a long, hard journey through thick forests, across frozen rivers, and into areas controlled by Native American tribes. The weather was terrible, and at one point, a guide even tried to kill him. But George survived and returned with important information for the British. This mission showed George's courage and determination. Even though the French refused to leave, the British leaders were impressed. They gave George the rank of lieutenant colonel in the colonial army. In 1754, George was sent back to the Ohio Valley with 150 soldiers to fight the French. This was his first real military command, and he was eager to prove himself. But the French had a larger, stronger army. After a long and hard battle, George was forced to surrender, one of the very few times in his life he ever did. Even though he lost, George learned valuable lessons about war strategy, discipline, and the importance of knowing your enemy. The British and French soon entered a bigger war called the French and Indian War, 1754 to 1763. In 1755, George joined the British Army again, under General Edward Braddock. But Braddock was used to fighting the European way, in open fields, and did not understand how to fight in American forests. One day, the British Army was attacked in the woods by the French and their Native American allies. It was a disaster. General Braddock was killed, and the soldiers panicked, but George stayed calm. He led the surviving soldiers to safety, saving hundreds of lives. When the battle was over, people noticed something amazing. George's coat had 4 bullet holes, but he was completely unhurt. Many believed he had been protected by God's hand. This event made his reputation even stronger. Still, George was frustrated. The British officers born in England received more respect and promotion than colonial officers like him. This planted the first seeds of anger in George's heart about British rule. In 1758, at the age of 26, George left the army. He had fought bravely and learned much about leadership and the strengths and weaknesses of the British Army. But he was tired of war. He wanted a peaceful life to manage his land and start a family. In 1759, George married Martha Custis, a kind and intelligent widow with 2 children. Martha was a perfect partner for George. Their marriage gave George financial stability and allowed him to grow Mount Vernon into a successful plantation. He also became active in local politics and was respected by his community. For a while, George enjoyed a happy, quiet life. But in the 1760s and 1770s, things began to change. Tensions between the American colonies and Britain grew. The British government placed heavy taxes on the colonies without letting them have a voice in Parliament. Many Americans, including George, felt this was unfair. George attended meetings with other colonial leaders to discuss how to respond. Slowly, the idea of fighting for independence began to grow stronger. By 1781, the American Revolution had gone on for years. The war was hard, with victories and defeats, but George Washington never gave up. With help from the French army, Washington led his troops to the Battle of Yorktown in Virginia. After a long fight, the British Army finally surrendered. The United States was free. America had won independence, but there was a new problem. The young country had no strong government and no clear direction. The people needed a leader they could trust. In 1789, George Washington was chosen to be the first president of the United States. He didn't want the job. He had served the country for many years and dreamed of retiring at Mount Vernon, but he accepted because he loved his country and felt it was his duty. As president, Washington had many challenges. There were no rules for a new president to follow, so he had to set the example. He worked to make the government fair, keep the country safe, and help the economy grow. He stayed neutral in foreign wars, stopped violent rebellions, and warned Americans not to let political parties divide the nation. After 2 terms, 8 years, Washington decided to step down. Many people wanted him to be president again, but he refused. He believed no leader should have power for too long. America was a democracy, not a kingdom. In 1796, he gave a famous farewell address, telling Americans to stay united, avoid unnecessary wars, and always protect their freedom. His words are still remembered today. Washington returned to Mount Vernon to live peacefully with his wife Martha. But in 1799, after riding in cold rain, he became very sick. On December 14, 1799, George Washington passed away at the age of 67. The whole country mourned. Church bells rang, people cried in the streets, and even leaders in Europe honored him. George Washington left behind more than a name in history. He showed the world that true power is serving others, not controlling them. He proved that a leader can be strong, honest, and humble. Today, his name lives on in Washington, D.C., on the $1 bill, in schools, parks, and even a special holiday called President's Day. His life teaches us, never give up. Failures are steps toward success. Be honest and fair. Trust is the heart of leadership. Serve. Don't rule. Great leaders lift others up. Be brave. Do the right thing, even when it's hard. George Washington was more than the first president of the United States. He was a symbol of hope, courage, and democracy, proof that one person can change history. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history with Chasing English. We hope you enjoyed learning English while discovering the inspiring story of George Washington. If you liked this story, please like, subscribe, and share so more friends can join our family of learners. Remember, in English, just like in life, every small step brings you closer to big dreams. See you in the next story.